Okay, can you hear me, Parth?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you.
Federation of Tax Consultant, Income Tax Bar Association, તેમજ Southern Gujarat Tax Bar Association, Panchmal Tax District Association, Godhra, and the Chamber of Parth Contractor and the other association of the state of Gujarat. Would like to warm welcome today's learned senior advocate, Jalshree Unwala. Sir, very good morning and warm welcome on behalf of all the association for sparing your valuable time and on the very important and the critical issues in relation to the criminal appeals, how to approach, how to prepare criminal issue, appreciating evidences, relevant judgments, judicial pronouncement, precedents, and landmark case law. You have covered up all the very important aspects in respect to the criminal appeal. So thank you very much for choosing such kind of subject and consent for such webinar in the larger interest of the litigants or the students, lawyers, and the tax consultants and the consultants. We also acknowledge the hard work of Parth Contractor since the dedications for arranging such webinar. પાર્થભાઈ અમારા મેમ્બરનું એટલી બધી ડિમાન્ડ છે હવે એવું કે છે કે હવે રેગ્યુલર 1 કલાક અમને બનાવો તો વી રિક્વેસ્ટ ઓન બિહાફ ઓફ ઓલ ધી મેમ્બર્સ ઓફ ધી એસોસિએશન કારણ કે આવા ગુજરાતના જાણીતા ધારાશાસ્ત્રી અને સિનિયર ધારાશાસ્ત્રી જ્યારે આપણને આપણા લોયર્સ ફેટર્નિટીને સંબોધન આપે અને વિષય વસ્તુ પર જેમને મળવા મુશ્કેલ છે જેમની અપોઇન્ટમેન્ટ મળવી મુશ્કેલ છે એવા સિનિયર ધારાશાસ્ત્રી શ્રીઓ જ્યારે એક વાર્તાલાપ કરે લોયર સાથે તો એમને એટલો સરસ અભિગમ વ્યક્ત થાય છે કે આવું સરસ માળખું અને એક એજ્યુકેશનના માધ્યમથી એક સિનિયર લોયર પણ આપણી સાથે જોડાય અને અમારા પ્રશ્નોનું સમાધાન કરે અને નિરાકરણ કરે એ બહુ મોટી વાત છે એટલે થેન્ક યુ પાર્થ સર એન્ડ થેન્ક યુ જલ ઉનાવાલા સર સિનિયર એડવોકેટ સાહેબે ખૂબ મોટું યોગદાન આપ્યું છે ગુજરાતની જ્યુડિશિયલી જજમેન્ટ્સમાં landmark judgment માં ઘણું contribution આપ્યું છે. Now over to Parth Contractor for the further proceedings.
Thank you Dhruven bhai for the very kind words. Thank you Jal bhai for sparing time for all of us. Criminal appeals is certainly a subject which I personally will be wanting to learn because I have not had the experience. So therefore one of the reasons for having this was to ensure that you teach me this topic so that it can be useful someday in the High Court. Thank you very much for sparing time for us. Over to you, Jalbhai. I'll just do a screen share for your PPT.
Yes.
Over to you, Jalbhai.
First and foremost, thank you. Thanks a million to the Gujarat Federation of Tax Consultants and Parth Contractor for having given this opportunity to me to be able to speak something and give my views on the critical views and the appreciation of evidence in criminal appeals. Thank you, Parth. First and foremost, hats off to your modesty for having said that it will be a learning point for a seasoned lawyer like Mr. Parth Contractor, which I'm sure I'm 101% not going to agree with that. And I'm quite sure that all the panelists here as well as the participants who are here are also not going to take this. But nevertheless, not taking much time on that. Parth, we shall start with the topic.
Yes.
I just want to know, am I audible to everyone?
Yes, yes, Jalbhai, your voice is absolutely fine.
Thank you very much. Friends, first and foremost, let us kindly understand that today we are not going to discuss about criminal law as in particular. We are only and only going to discuss about criminal appeals. Now, first and foremost, the topics in which I have bifurcated this entire discussion is mainly into 4 types. Number 1, the types of appeals. Number 2, that is preparation of appeal, which is very important from the perspective of an advocate, how to prepare a criminal appeal. I'll come later on as to why I have put up this topic. Number 3 would be the critical issues and the appreciation of evidence, which is very important from the perspective of a criminal appeal. And lastly, the case laws which are discussed on different points in a criminal appeal arising out of different offenses and with respect to the scope of appeals. Now, Parth, can you put me on to types of appeals? Yes. Friends, yes. Friends, when we talk about types of appeals, we are going into chapter number 29 of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, which mainly deals with all appeals to be filed against judgments. Kindly take into consideration this aspect, that will be chapter number 29. Now, I have bifurcated the appeals mainly into 4 categories. Number 1 is a conviction appeal. Number 2 will be an acquittal appeal. Third is very important because this has come into play with respect to offenses arising out of a police report. This category has come into effect from and with effect from 2009. That is victim's right to file an appeal. And lastly is a state government's appeal, an appeal by the state government against an order of acquittal or even against an order of sentence. Now we'll first discuss conviction appeals. Can we go on to yes? Friends, when we say that what is a conviction appeal, let me first apprise you that a conviction appeal, which everyone knows, is and would arise from an order of conviction and sentence passed by a trial court and which can be appealed against. Now, this would be governed by section 374. If you see the wordings of subsection 1, it's very important that it says that any person convicted on a trial held by a high court in its extraordinary original criminal jurisdiction may appeal to the Supreme Court. So this subsection 1 mainly deals with a case where the high court on its original side has convicted a person, then the appeal would lie to the Supreme Court. Second, subsection 2 says any person convicted on a trial held by a sessions judge or an additional sessions judge or on a trial held by any other court in which a sentence of imprisonment for more than 7 years has been passed against him or against any other person convicted at the same trial may appeal to the High Court. So there are 3 aspects which are very important. Number 1 is that the order of conviction should be by a trial court, which should be either a sessions judge or an additional sessions judge, or a trial court other than a sessions judge and the additional sessions judge, which has the powers to impose sentence of imprisonment for more than 7 years. Now, if you can take it here that if there is an order of imprisonment for more than 7 years past, the appeal against the order of conviction would lie straight to the High Court. Now we come to subsection 3. Save as otherwise provided in subsection 2. Any person convicted on a trial held by a metropolitan magistrate or assistant session judge or magistrate of the first class or the second class. Then sub clause B, sentenced under section 325, or in respect of whom an order has been made or a sentence has been passed under section 360 by any magistrate, may appeal to the Court of Sessions. So now kindly see 374 is divided into 3 parts. Subsection 1, an appeal to the Supreme Court from an order of conviction by the High Court. Subsection 2, an appeal to the High Court from an order of conviction and sentence passed by the session judge or an additional session judge or by any trial court where the sentence is more than 7 years. And third category is an appeal to the Sessions Court in the circumstances envisaged in subclauses A, B, and C of subsection 3 of section 374. Now, most important is subsection 4. Kindly see this. When an appeal has been filed against a sentence passed under section 376. Now 376 deals with punishment for rape. The definition of rape is under section 375, but the punishment imposed is under section 376. And then the different categories of rape, that is 376A, AB, B, C, D, DA, DB, and E of the Indian Penal Code. The appeal shall be disposed of within a period of 6 months from the date of filing of such appeal. Now, this provision was earlier not there in the Code of Criminal Procedure, but this came into picture only after the ghastly case of rape and murder in the case of Nirbhaya. The legislators found that it is imperative to put this subsection 4 because these kind of cases require a higher speed of disposal, a faster speed of disposal as compared to the other cases. And therefore, you kindly see here that the wordings are mandatory. The legislature has used the word shall be disposed of within a period of 6 months from the date of filing of such appeal. Now, this is basically procedural in nature, and the wordings used are shall, which makes it mandatory. Parth, the next slide. Now, I have made a short note here, if you can see, which says that under the present provision of the code, a convict can approach the Supreme Court against the conviction order passed by the High Court in its extraordinary jurisdiction. Likewise, a person convicted for more than 7 years can also approach the High Court. Words any other court used in subsection 2 would mean and include all the courts which are constituted under special laws. This provision also empowers the learned session judge to hear an appeal preferred before it from the judgments as mentioned in subclause 3. The provisions of subclause 4 came to be inserted by the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2018. Please note this. Note the date. That is with effect from 11th of August 2018. More particularly after the famous, I would rather not like to use the word famous, but the unfortunate case of the rape of a girl called Nirbhaya, prescribing the period of 6 months for disposal of appeal against the sentence passed under section 376. And likewise, the powers of awarding sentences by the concerned courts are prescribed under section 28 and 29. Now wait here, Parth. Till now we have been discussing the right of a convict to prefer an appeal to the higher forum. But I would also like to take into consideration and discuss the powers under which a sessions court, a magistrate's court, or a high court is given the powers to convict. Now the question which would arise is that, sir, from where do these powers emanate? Where is the enabling power? The enabling provision under the CRPC, which is that power? Therefore, we will go to section 28 and 29 of the code. Now kindly see section 28 says this: sentences which High Court and Sessions Court may pass. A High Court may pass any sentence authorized by law. A session judge or additional session judge may pass any sentence authorized by law. But any sentence of death passed by any such judge would include the session judge, additional session judge, and the High Court, shall be subject to confirmation by the High Court. Now, pausing here for a moment, it is very important to note here that though the learned session judges and the additional session judges have been given the powers by the legislature to pass a sentence of death, but they have also taken the care that when these courts are passing the order of sentence of death, it will always be subject to confirmation by the High Court. Now, therefore, for the purposes of this provision, for the purposes of death, the penalty of death, section 28 would assume importance. Kindly see, we all know the fact, and we all discuss day in and day out, we have been discussing time and again, that yes, the order of conviction and sentence of death penalty is subject to the confirmation by the High Court. But I'll be very frank with you that till about a number of years back, even I was not aware about the fact that section 28 was the section which gave powers to the session judge, no doubt, to pass an order of sentence of death, but that was subject to the confirmation by the High Court. That was under section 28. Subsection 3, an assistant session judge may pass any sentence authorized by law except a sentence of death or of imprisonment for life or of imprisonment for a term exceeding 10 years. Now, in the earlier subsections 28, 1 and 2, we have seen the powers which were given to the Honorable High Court, the learned session judges, and the additional session judges. Subsection 3 deals with the cases where the assistant session judge may pass any sentence authorized under law, except a sentence of death or imprisonment for life, or of imprisonment for a term exceeding 10 years. Therefore, the powers which have been given to the assistant session judge, if I can put it in a simpler language, is only up to 10 years, not beyond that. Now we come to section 29 of the CRPC, which deals with sentences which the magistrate can pass. Till now, section 28 dealt with the High Court, the session judge, the additional session judge, and the assistant session judge. We go to now section 29, which deals with sentences which a magistrate may pass. The court of, please lay a lot of emphasis on the hierarchy of the judiciary, which has been mentioned in section 28 and 29. Please have your focus on that. The court of a chief judicial magistrate, that is CJM as we say in normal parlance, may pass any sentence authorized by law except a sentence of death or of imprisonment for life or of imprisonment for a term exceeding 7 years. Therefore, assistant session judge under section 28(3) up to 10 years. In the same manner, 29(1) says that the chief judicial magistrate will have powers for a term not exceeding 7 years, therefore up to 7 years. Subsection 2 says the court of a magistrate of the first class may pass a sentence of imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years. Therefore, the JMFC, that is what we generally call in normal parlance, that is judicial magistrate first class, will have the powers to imprison a person for a term only up to 3 years. Now 29 subsection 3 deals with the court of a magistrate of the second class, subsection 2 was first class, may pass a sentence of imprisonment for a term not exceeding 1 year, which means that a court of the magistrate of second class will have the powers only up to 1 year, and even with respect to fine, nothing exceeding 5,000 rupees. The court of a chief metropolitan magistrate. Now, I would just like to stop here for a second and kindly explain one aspect, that the normal question which would arise is as to, so what is the difference between a chief judicial magistrate and a chief metropolitan magistrate? It's very simple. A chief judicial magistrate is with respect to the offenses which have taken place in the rural areas, whereas metropolitan magistrate comes into picture in cases where the offenses have taken place in the city area. Therefore, metropolitan magistrates you will find only in cities. This is very important. The court of chief metropolitan magistrate shall have the powers of the court of a chief judicial magistrate. As I said, same, they are akin to each other, number subsection 1. And that of a metropolitan magistrate, the powers of the court of magistrate, that is subsection 2 of the first class. I hope this has made many doubts clear with respect to the powers of the court to sentence. Now, yes, we go on to another topic, that is the topic with respect to acquittal appeals. Acquittal appeals, again, before I start with section 378, I would like to emphasize one aspect, that acquittal appeals are also can be divided into two categories. Acquittal appeals where the state government has the right and the powers to prefer an appeal against an order of acquittal. Whereas the second category would be appeals in case of acquittal where the victim has been given the right to file an appeal. Now there also the law has seen some change since 2009 onwards, and where earlier the victim in cases arising out of police report, that is I would say in cases arising out of an FIR where the police has investigated into a cognizable offense and then the charge sheet, and then the trial court in cases where there is an order of acquittal. Earlier the victim or the complainant did not have any right to file an appeal against an order of acquittal. Subsequently, the law has changed, and we'll be discussing that after this discussion in section 378 as to from when and how the introduction of the right of appeal to a victim has been given by the legislature. Kindly see section 378, appeal in case of acquittal. Subsection 1 says that save as otherwise provided in subsection 2 and subject to the provisions of subsection 3 and 5, an order of acquittal, 3 and 5A, the district magistrate may in any case direct the public prosecutor to present an appeal to the Court of Sessions from an order of acquittal passed by a magistrate in respect of a cognizable and non-bailable offense. Now, this subsection A, subclause A of subsection 1 says that in case a public prosecutor is desirous of filing an appeal, in the first place, what he'll have to do is that he'll have to seek a direction from the district magistrate with respect to filing of an appeal in the Court of Sessions from an order of acquittal passed by a magistrate in respect of a cognizable and non-bailable offense. Therefore, when it comes to when it says cognizable and non-bailable, it means that also it would also include cases, or rather it would include cases which have been investigated by the police and arising out of a police report. Now we come to subclause B of subsection 1, which says that the state government may, in any case, direct the public prosecutor to present an appeal to the High Court from the original or appellate order of an acquittal passed by any court other than a High Court, not being an order under clause A or an order of acquittal passed by the Court of Sessions in revision. Now, if in cases where the order of acquittal has been passed by a court other than a Court of Sessions in revision, the revisional jurisdiction, then the public prosecutor, what he is required to obtain is that the consent of the state government, and he has to get an opinion from the state government, a direction from the state government with respect to filing an appeal against an order of acquittal. Subsection 2 may be seen. If such an order of acquittal is passed in any case in which the offense has been investigated by the Delhi Special Police Establishment constituted under the Delhi Special Police Establishments Act, or by any other agency empowered to make investigation into an offense under any central act other than this court, the central government. Now, therefore, if there is a central agency which has investigated into the and was the investigating agency, they will require the permission, the approval, and the sanction from the central government. If it is from an agency of a state, then the state government, as per subclause B of subsection 1. Now we go to subclause A of subsection 2, which says that it would lie to the Court of Sessions from an order of acquittal passed by a magistrate in respect of a cognizable and non-bailable offense. Subclause B says that the acquittal appeal would lie to the High Court from an original or appellate order of an acquittal passed by any court other than an High Court, not being an order under clause A or an order of acquittal passed by the Court of Sessions in revision. I'm again reading this. Kindly pay attention to this aspect, that an appeal in case of acquittal shall lie to the High Court from an original or appellate order of an acquittal passed by any court other than a High Court. Therefore, it excludes the High Court, not being an order under clause A. Therefore, it also excludes the categories as mentioned in clause A. That is, if you kindly go to clause A of subsection 1, which says an order of acquittal passed by a magistrate. Now, therefore, it has to be a court of law other than a court of magistrate, which has passed the order of acquittal. Then in such cases, the appeal would lie to the High Court from an original or appellate order of an acquittal passed by any court. Now, any court here would mean any court other than the court mentioned in subclause A of subsection 1. Being an order under clause A or an order of acquittal passed by the Court of Sessions in revision. Now take a case where the lower court, the trial court being a court of metropolitan magistrate, has passed an order of acquittal. The revision would lie before the session Court and the order of acquittal is confirmed by the Court of Sessions, even in such cases, the appeal would lie to the High Court. Therefore, the legislature says that an order of acquittal passed by a Court of Sessions in revisional jurisdiction. The revision, the word used is revision. Now, Parth, kindly we may go to the next slide. Now, subsection 3 is very important here. Kindly see, it says that no appeal to the High Court under subsection 1 or subsection 2 shall be entertained except with the leave of the High Court. Now, what is the question is as to what is the leave of the High Court? It means that if you want to prefer an appeal to the Honorable the High Court of Gujarat or any High Court in the country under subsection 1 or subsection 2. Now it says the subsection 3 starts with the sentence, no appeal to the High Court under subsection 1 or subsection 2 shall be entertained except with the leave of the High Court. Now, therefore, kindly take into consideration one aspect, that this subsection 3 would apply only and only in cases of subsection 1 clause B. Parth, if you can again please take to the earlier slide. Kindly see B. The state government may in any case direct the public prosecutor to present an appeal to the High Court from an order, original or appellate order of an acquittal passed by any court other than a High Court, not being an order under clause A, or an order of acquittal passed by the Court of Sessions in revision. Parth, can we again go to subsection 3? Therefore, when subsection 3 speaks of an appeal to the High Court, it categorically takes into consideration that that appeal to the High Court would lie only in cases where it falls under category 1 subclause B and category subsection 2 subclause B, and it would necessarily be falling into a category where the case is arising from a police report. Now we come to subsection 4. If such an order of acquittal is passed in any case instituted upon complaint. Now, therefore, I emphasized in the earlier sections that it fell within the category of cases which would arise from cases arising out of police report. Now, subsection 4, 378 subsection 4 deals with cases arising instituted upon a complaint. Now, when we say a complaint under the Criminal Procedure Code would mean a complaint under section 200 and not an FIR under section 154 of the CRPC. Kindly appreciate one aspect, that in criminal law, when we say complaint, it is a complaint under section 200. Do not mix a complaint with an FIR, because the law itself distinguishes between an FIR under 154 and a complaint under section 200, and therefore two different provisions are given by the law. Now, kindly see, if such an order of acquittal is passed in any case instituted upon complaint, and the High Court on an application made to it by the complainant in this behalf grants special leave to appeal from an order of acquittal, the complainant may present such an appeal to the High Court. Now, therefore, this subsection 4 of section 378 envisages a situation where in cases where there is an order of acquittal, judgment and order of acquittal passed by a court below, that is any court lower in rank than the Honorable the High Court, then in that case, an appeal has to be instituted before the Honorable High Court, but there is a rider which has been put in subsection 4 that only and only after the leave, a special leave to appeal has been granted by the High Court, only in such cases the appeals would be entertained. Now, the question is that if the application is not entertained, then what would happen? Kindly have a look at subsection 5. no application under subsection 4 for grant of special leave to appeal from an order of acquittal shall be entertained by the High Court after the expiry of 6 months. Therefore, the question of limitation, where the complainant is a public servant. So in cases where the complainant is a public servant, and if he has initiated a complaint, then the limitation for filing or registering an application for special leave to appeal would be 6 months. And in the rest of the cases, other than the category mentioned here, would be 60 days in every other case computed from the date of that order of acquittal. Now, subsection 6 may be seen. If in any case, the application under subsection 4 for the grant of special leave to appeal from an order of acquittal is refused, which I said that is coming in the next subsequent provision. Suppose the special leave to application is rejected, meaning thereby that the leave is not granted, it is refused, then no appeal from that order of acquittal shall lie under subsection 1 or under subsection 2. Now, there is a small note which I have prepared here. Just 1 minute. Under the present section, an appeal can be filed against the order of acquittal, even by the state government, but with the leave of the court. Further, subsection 4 also enables the complainant to file an appeal against the order of acquittal with the leave of the court in cases where the acquittal order is passed in cases instituted upon a complaint. Further, now this will have to be read in conjunction with section 319 of the CRPC, which I'll be taking you all to there after this. So Parth, now the next slide. Now, I would like all the participants here to take a note of the fact that there are according to me, three very important judgments on the scope and ambit of an acquittal appeal. That according to me, I feel that are the landmark judgments. Kindly take note of these three judgments. The first is Shiv Swarup versus King Emperor. That is ILR 1934-56 ALL 645. Now, this is again with respect to the scope and ambit of the provisions of section 378 in cases where there is an order of acquittal and there is an appeal which has been filed. The second judgment is again a constitutional bench judgment, which is very important, which is AIR 1954 Supreme Court, page 3, Prandas versus the state. And one, I wouldn't say a very recent judgment, but that is of 2008, which is also a landmark judgment. That is Ghurelal versus State of UP, reported in 2008, volume 10 SCC, page 450. This judgment also lays down the principles of scope and power of interference in cases of acquittal appeal. Now, kindly go through these judgments, which will help you to know as to what is the scope of the High Court or any court with respect to interference in cases of an order of acquittal, because the scope is absolutely different in conviction appeals and in acquittal appeals. Now we come to the third category, that is the victim's right of appeal. This is governed by the provisions of section 372 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, which reads as this, that no appeal shall lie from any judgment or order of a criminal court, except as provided for by this court or by any other law for the time being in force, provided, now this is important, provided that the victim shall have a right to prefer an appeal against any order passed by the court acquitting the accused or convicting for a lesser offense or imposing inadequate compensation, and such appeal shall lie to the court to which an appeal ordinarily lies against the order of conviction of such court. Now, though this proviso to section 372 sounds a little bit complex, but it is actually not so. The proviso mainly takes into its swipe that which I talked about, the amendment which came into force. This amendment came into force on the 31st of December 2009. Now, till the 30th of December 2009, the victim had no right to file an appeal, nor even the complainant had a right to file an appeal in cases arising out of police report. Therefore, the legislature inserted the provisions, the proviso to section 372, which reads as this. Again, I'm reading it slowly for your consumption, that the victim shall have a right to prefer an appeal. Now, victim, if you want to see the definition, who is a victim, it would not necessarily mean that it can be only the complainant. It can be any person who is aggrieved and who has been injured in the entire offense which has taken place, which if you want to see, please kindly turn to section 2 of the CRPC, which says victim's definition is given under the CRPC. Kindly have a look at section 2. WA, which reads as this, that victim means a person who has suffered any loss or injury caused by reason of the act or omission for which the accused person has been charged, and the expression victim includes his or her guardian or legal heir. Now, kindly appreciate one aspect here, that in cases of murder, the victim has died. It would obviously and logically not lie in the mouth of any counsel to say that the victim is no more, therefore the legal heirs of that victim will have no right to file an appeal. So therefore, envisaging certain situations like that, the legislature has amended this provision, included the word deliberately and intentionally. They have used the word victim and they have not used the word complainant. So kindly take into consideration this aspect, that the proviso starts with the word victim and not the complainant. I hope this is clear to you. And now, where would the appeal lie, and in which circumstances the appeal would lie? Number one, the proviso envisages that against any order passed by the court, number one is acquitting the accused. The second category is or convicting for a lesser offense. That means that I just hypothetically, I'll tell you that in case there was a case of murder, 302, and the court converts it into 300 and either 304, part 1 or part 2, then the court has convicted him for an offense which is lesser, because then the sentence also becomes lesser. Therefore, the second category which the provision says is convicting for a lesser offense, or number 3 is imposing inadequate compensation, and such appeal shall lie to the court. Which court? Now this is important. It shall lie to the court to which an appeal ordinarily lies against the order of conviction of such court. Now therefore, if the appeal, the entire idea of the legislature was to see that there is no inconsistency with respect to the hierarchy where the appeals can be filed. Now take a case where, as I just now demonstrated to you, that there is a charge of 302, but the conviction is under section 304, either under part 1 or part 2. Then in such a case, take a case where the accused also files an appeal against the order of conviction, and even the complainant files. Therefore, the court, section, the proviso to this section says that in which kind of cases and in where would the appeal lie? It would lie against the order of conviction, so that there is no discrepancy with respect to the hierarchy, where the accused may go before the Sessions Court filing an appeal for conviction, and the complainant may go to the Honorable the High Court filing an appeal against the order of acquittal, or for a lesser compensation or a lesser offense. Therefore, in order to see that there is a consistency of appeals with respect to the forum before which it is filed. The legislature says that ordinarily it would lie against an order of conviction of such court. Therefore, this is how the proviso takes into consideration. Now, we go on to the state government's right to file an appeal against sentence. I would again not be elaborating this section because why I put in this section, otherwise it was not required. But if the state government wants to challenge an order only of sentence, even then the provision is taken into its consideration that the appeal by the state government against an order of sentence would be governed under the provisions of section 377. Parth, the next slide. Subsection 4 of that section says, I'm sorry, yeah, the earlier slide. Yeah, yes. Now, summary dismissal of appeal. Many a times we come across people who ask us that, sir, what is the difference between summary dismissal of appeal and a dismissal of appeal otherwise? It is very simple that if an appeal is not entertained at the initial stage and the record and proceedings are called and without admitting the appeal has been dismissed, then it's a summary dismissal of the appeal. So that can be done. Where are the powers with the court? Then the appellate court has the powers under section 384. Please kindly take into consideration this aspect, that the powers given to the appellate court to dismiss an appeal summarily is under section 384. Parth, the next slide. This again is the section, and one of the judgments dealing with this aspect is 1976, volume 1, Supreme Court cases, page 162. That is Dhondiba Gundu Pomaje versus State of Maharashtra. Yes, now this is very important. Hearing of appeals not dismissed under the previous section. Not dismissed under the previous section means they are not dismissed summarily. Now, kindly see, so in such a nice manner, the Code of Criminal Procedure has been made, the provisions over here, even how the appeals have to be heard, even that is contemplated by the Code of Criminal Procedure here, and that is section 385. Parth, I'm quite sure many of us would not be over here knowing that there is also a procedure which is prescribed for hearing of the appeal. So section 385 would be very important. Kindly see, subsection 1 says that if the appellate court does not dismiss the appeal summarily, it shall cause notice of the time and place at which such appeal be heard to be given. To whom? To the appellant or his pleader. To such officer as the state government may appoint in this behalf. If the appeal is from a judgment of conviction in a case instituted upon complaint, then to the complainant. If the appeal is under section 377 or section 378, then that is the acquittal appeal which we discussed earlier. Then the notice is to be given to the accused and shall also furnish such officer, complainant and accused with a copy of the grounds of appeal. And subsection 2 states that the appellate court shall then send for the record of the case if such record is not already available in that court and hear the parties. Now this is the procedure how an appeal should be heard. That is under section 385, and then the proviso says that provided that if the appeal is only as to the extent or legality of the sentence, then the court may dispose of the appeal without sending for the record. Therefore, the provision says that it takes into consideration the appeals which I showed in the earlier section, that the state government has a right to file also an appeal against sentence. Then in such cases, the court may not call for the record and proceedings and straight away go on to hear the appeal on the question of sentence. Next slide. Where the only ground for appeal from a conviction is the alleged severity of the sentence, the appellant shall not, except with the leave of the court, urge or be heard in support of any other ground. Now, the law is taken into its consideration. One of a situation where if a person has appealed against only the severity of sentence arising out of any conviction, that means that he has challenged the sentence only, then unless and until the court before whom the appeal lies does not grant a leave to him, he cannot argue any other grounds on the merits of the appeal on the question of conviction, and it will be limited only to the extent of sentence. Parth, next provision. Next. Now, powers of the appellate court. Kindly see, earlier we dealt with the provisions which gave the procedure in which the appellate court shall decide an appeal. What is the procedure? Now we come to the provisions of section 386, which gives the powers to the appellate court, which says that after perusing such record and hearing the appellant or his pleader, if he appears, and the public prosecutor, if he appears, and in case of an appeal under section 377 or 378, that is acquittal appeals, the accused, if he appears, the appellate court may, if it considers that there is no sufficient ground for interfering, dismiss the appeal, or the second category is subsection clause A, in an appeal from an order of acquittal, reverse such order and direct that further inquiry be made, that is one option, or that the accused be retried or committed for trial, that is the second option available with the appellate court. I wouldn't like to use the word option, but I would rather say the powers. That is the second power which is given to the appellate court, as the case may be, or find him guilty and pass sentence on him according to law. That would be governed by the provisions of 377 and 378 in cases of acquittal appeals. Where there is an order of acquittal, the court can pass this order. Again, that earlier slide, Parth, just 1 minute. In an appeal from conviction, what can the court do? Reverse the finding and sentence and acquit or discharge the accused, or order him to be retried. That is the second power which is given to the court by a court of competent jurisdiction subordinate to such appellate court, or committed for trial, or in the alternative, alter the finding but maintaining the sentence, or the next slide. With or without altering the finding, alter the nature or the extent of the nature and the extent of the sentence, but not so to enhance the same. In an appeal from enhancement of sentence, for enhancement of sentence, reverse the finding and sentence and acquit or discharge the accused, that is one. Alter the finding, maintaining the sentence, or number three, with or without altering the finding, alter the nature or the extent, or the nature and extent of the sentence, so as to enhance or reduce the same. In an appeal from any other order, alter or reverse such order, make any amendment or any consequential incidental order that may be just and proper, provided that the sentence shall not be enhanced unless the accused has been given an opportunity of showing cause against such enhancement. Provided further that the appellate court shall not inflict greater punishment for the offense, which in its opinion the accused has committed, than might have been inflicted for the offense by the court passing the order of sentence under such appeal. Parth, now, this is a short note. Kindly take down this judgment. I'm not reading the note which I have prepared because I'm going on explaining along with the sections that I'm reading. But you may kindly take down this citation which is there for with respect to the powers. This is probably everyone here would be knowing and would be interested to see as to during the pendency of appeal against the order of conviction. Sir, what happens to the accused if he is in jail? Or even if he is not in jail and his time to surrender has been extended by the trial court itself, then obviously you have the powers under section 389. Please take into consideration here one aspect, that the wordings used by the legislature are suspension of sentence pending the appeal, release of appellant on bail. Therefore, the first consequence would be pray for suspension of sentence. That means he can be granted bail during pendency of the appeal only and only if the order of sentence is suspended. No doubt, the court is not powerless to suspend the order of conviction, but that is in the rarest of rare cases. In very exceptional cases that the court can even suspend the order of conviction, which normally they don't do unless the order of conviction, if not suspended, it will have a long bearing effect on certain other aspects of the accused in his life, then yes, the order of conviction in very exceptional circumstances can be suspended, but mainly with respect to suspension of sentence pending appeal, and only then can he be released on bail. So it is in two parts. 389, everybody knows about it. Yes, next. Again, there is a note, but again, one very important judgment. Please, Bhagwan Rama Shinde Gosai and others versus the state of Gujarat, which is reported in 1999, volume 4 Supreme Court cases, page 421. And the other is Babu Hastimal Marwadi versus the state of Gujarat. That is the report. It is reported in 2017. It's in the GLH software which we have, so you can find it from the name. Yes, Parth. Now we come to the most interesting issue which all the viewers here and all the participants here would be interested in knowing. Well, we come to preparation of an appeal. As far as appeals are concerned, kindly take into consideration one very important aspect, and that is that you will have to divide it into two parts. Number one, first and foremost, is preparing an appeal. How do you prepare an appeal? Because arguments before the court would come into at a very later stage when the appeal comes up for final hearing. But before that, what should a lawyer do? How to prepare a criminal appeal? Because a criminal appeal is not a writ petition or a petition for quashing, or it is not an application for bail. An appeal is more or less a continuation of the trial which is there, and therefore preparing an appeal and arguing an appeal is an absolutely a different ball game. It is very important that we start an appeal by first, every lawyer, howsoever senior or howsoever junior he is, I would say that he should first and foremost read the prosecution case, and that is by reading the FIR, because that is how you will come to know as to what was the starting point of the prosecution, why the prosecution was lodged. Second is, kindly go through the entire charge sheet, not just the pro forma charge sheet. No, you will come to know the role of each accused in the charge sheet, no doubt. But you will have to go through each and every paper of the charge sheet, and that papers of the charge sheet would include the statement of witnesses and documentary evidences also. So first and foremost, if you get a client in your office saying that, sir, mare appeal karwani hai, I want to file an appeal against so and so order of conviction and sentence, the first thing that you will ask from him is not the judgment and order of conviction. That he will only tell you ke kitla varashni saja thai hai, how much he has been sentenced to. But please, when you prepare an appeal, ask him to give you the FIR and the papers of the charge sheet. No doubt, the most important would be the depositions before the court, which are a part of the record. But for the purpose of omissions and contradictions of the depositions of the witnesses which are there who have deposed before the court, the papers of the charge sheet and the FIR become very important. Now, this chart, this table which you are seeing here is, it's not a pro forma prescribed in any books of law, but this is the manner in which I prepare my appeals in the office. And criminal appeals, when you prepare, this chart or this table, if you prepare according to me, it will make your work very easy. Please see the columns here are serial number. Then the second column is exhibit numbers. The third column is PW. PW stands for prosecution witness number. And the fourth column is the particulars of the nature of witness. Nature of witness means whether he is or she is an eyewitness, a chance witness. You may even put in the column according to you that an independent witness or an interested witness, expert witness, investigating officer witness, what kind of witness that person is, and or the nature of the document. Now, when we talk of a record in any trial, be it civil, criminal, there are two major kinds of evidences which will be produced. If we put it in the most simplest of the simplest manner. Oral evidence, that is known as, in common parlance, it is known as ocular evidence in criminal law, and the documentary evidence, where we deal with the documents which are placed on record. So this is how I prepare a chart or a table, and the last column would be the page number. Now that page number would be the page number which is there in the paper book, because in every criminal appeal, when a criminal appeal becomes ripe for hearing at the final hearing stage, the paper book, the High Court or the Sessions Court will prepare and give it to you. The department is supposed to, duty bound to give it to you. So when I say the page number, it deals with the page number in the paper book prepared by the High Court, the department of the High Court, or the Sessions Court, as the case may be. Parth, now the yes. Before I go on to this arguing of a criminal appeal, I would like to emphasize one aspect when you prepare an appeal, that I have till now I only told you that what you need to read with respect to up to the stage of chart sheet. But then comes the next stage, that reading each and every important and relevant, I'm again saying important and relevant, documentary evidence and ocular evidence. Now, ocular evidence, which is a part of the entire record and which has been there before the trial court and which has been reduced into writing and typed, is mainly divided into two parts: the chief examination of a witness, and then would be the cross-examination of the witness. Now, chief examination of a witness is mainly and has to be on the basis of the statement which he or she has given before the police. I am right now emphasizing more on cases which have been instituted upon a police report. In such cases, when you are dealing with either the eyewitness or a hearsay witness, I would be coming to the types of witnesses as I've earlier said also, that what you need to read in a criminal appeal is starting from the first prosecution witness till the last prosecution witness. Many a times people say that, oh, punch witness, no, we don't need to read it. He would have stated this, he normally gets hostile and all this. No. Please make it a point that when you are dealing with a conviction appeal or an acquittal appeal, either way, every witness is important. Please do not miss out on any witness. Yes, after reading the witness, the punch witness or whatever kind of witness he or she is, if you deem it appropriate not to read that before the court, fair enough. But it may so not happen that by your not reading the evidence of that witness, you may miss out on a very, very important point which is right there in front of you and which would be served on a platter to you, which otherwise you would just miss out because you were lazy enough not to read that witness. So most importantly, when you read a witness, now how to read a witness, how to prepare the evidence of a witness, kindly see, number one, you will have to, if he is the first informant, or in normal parlance, as people say, complainant, but I would say in cases arising out of police reports, the person who has registered the FIR is the first informant. So when you are reading the evidence of a first informant, you should first take on hand his first information report, kindly see his chief examination, whether it is in proper order with the first information report or not, and then kindly go on to the cross examination. Now, more often than not, the chief examination would be in consonance with the, in cases of a first informant, it would be in consonance with the FIR which he has lodged. So that would be verbatim produced in the evidence as a chief examination. But in a witness, if you want to critically examine a witness, you will have to very minutely go through the cross-examination of every witness. Please do not miss out on a single line in the cross-examination of a witness. And I may tell you that the real art of advocacy is, it's the creativity of a lawyer, and that creativity emanates from the trial court practice only and not at the appellate stage. So whenever you read a cross-examination of any witness, kindly try to envisage as to how this question was put by the lawyer to the witness. Therefore, cross-examination is, according to me, for the defense, cross-examination is the heart of the defense. How you cross-examine the witness in a criminal trial is very, very important, because the heart and the art, these two aspects, the art of cross-examination is not to put more questions, but the art of cross-examination lies in not asking which questions which are not to be asked. Now, kindly take into consideration that more the questions, better the cross-examination is never the rule. The art lies in only asking relevant question to the witnesses. Otherwise, what will happen is that you will end up bringing out on record certain things which the prosecution has failed to bring on record. So kindly see that you will have to first read the first information report if he is the first informant, or you will have to read the statement given by the witness before the police in the investigation, and then cross-examine him, and then see the cross-examination. You will have to compare the evidence of a witness from three angles. Number one, the statement of the witness before the police. Number two, the chief examination before the court. And number three, the cross-examination. Now it is in this manner that every prosecution witness will have to be looked into in detail how he has answered in the cross-examinations. Now for your perusal, I have bifurcated witnesses into two parts: prosecution witness and the defense witness. Defense witnesses won't have any categories right now, but prosecution witnesses would fall into about 6 categories. Eyewitness, that is a person who has himself witnessed the alleged incident. Hearsay witness is a witness who has come to know from another source, which is known as a hearsay witness. Punch witnesses are witnesses who are normally witnesses in a panchnama, which is carried out by the investigating agencies. Expert witness is the witness who is an expert in a particular field. Like I may say, take a case, the evidence of a doctor who testifies, comes to the court and testifies if he had treated the victim or the deceased just before he expired or at the time when he was injured in the hospital. Suppose a doctor, a panelist doctor who has carried out the postmortem report, then it may also be a handwriting expert. If it's a case of forgery, the evidence of the handwriting expert, the FSL officer, the officer who has carried out the report and given the report. It may also be a ballistic expert, so on and so forth. There would be number of expert witnesses. There would be witnesses on DNA also, where in 1999 I had an occasion to be a part of a very important trial. I would not name it here, but where the entire evidence of the prosecution, it depended on the evidence of the DNA of the deceased, because what the accused had done was that they had murdered the victim, the deceased, and taken her on the highway, and in the forest area they had burned the body. Luckily, the period was about the month of August or so. So it was raining at that point of time. So the body of the deceased was half burnt and half not burnt. And I still remember that the body was recognized by the relatives, no doubt about it. But still, it was required to be proved that the body is that of the deceased person only. Therefore, the DNA's evidence, DNA expert's evidence was very important. The DNA expert was called. He was examined, cross-examined for days together, and ultimately the accused were convicted on the basis of the evidence of the DNA. Then the witnesses from the investigating agency, that is the IO, that we normally call him the investigating officer, and witnesses for the proof of documents. Proof of documents means the author of a document and the person who is a signatory to the document. He will have to come and testify that yes, this is the document which I have signed. So this is how we have categorized these. Now, how to approach an appeal is another aspect which I have categorized into these parts, that where to attack. So I would always say that in cases of murder, other than cases arising out of circumstantial evidence, if there is an eyewitness, please straight away attack the evidence of the eyewitness. Attack the evidence of the eyewitness and try to bifurcate his evidence and destroy the evidence of the eyewitness. That will bring down 50% of the case of the prosecution. So attacking the witness, when I say attacking the witness, means attacking the evidence of the witness, not in the actual sense of witness. I'm saying attacking the evidence of the witness, which is there on paper, not in person. So I'm sorry, but I'm just giving this example so that you may not ask me today that, sir, how do we attack a witness? It will not be attacking that violence, a violent attack to a witness. I'm talking about attacking, have the thrust on the evidence of the witness, which is on paper, not in person. Okay. Second is pointing out to the court after, and how do we attack the evidence of a witness, would be pointing out to the court the contradictions in the evidence of every witness from the chief examination as well as the cross examination, as well as the statement before the police. Now, if it's a case arising out of a private complaint, yeah, obviously there won't be statements before the police, but then you will have to deal with the inquiry proceedings which were there, and that is how you will deal with the attacking the witness, the examination of a witness. Number 6 is, if necessary and if there are any improvements or omissions made by the witness in his depositions compared to his earlier statement. Therefore, I always say that I've been saying and emphasizing the statements before the police. Kindly try to see whether there are any improvements from his earlier statement or whether he has omitted to state anything in his deposition before the court. Kindly attack that. They are required to be highlighted and read out before the court. The next slide, Parth. Now this is very important, which I wanted to discuss this today with you. Though it's a very small topic, I would not take a lot of time. But please, my friends, every time people, even in the trial court, say that 313 na statement ma shu hoy, kashud na hoy. But no, the statement, the further statement of the accused under section 313 is very important. The reason is that after the completion of the reading of the entire evidence, oral as well as documentary, which has been brought on record, what is important is that the accused is put certain questions by the court. And if you see, I have undergone, I've undertaken many appeals and I have argued many appeals. And I have seen to it that one of the most important is the last question. Vadharama tamare kahin kevu che? Do you want to say anything in addition to what I have asked you earlier? And more often than not, the accused persons are advised, or I'm not sure, but they say ke na nathi kevu. It is at this point of time where the accused has a chance to put up his defense, even in the oral statement or the further statement under section 313. And for that, one very, very important judgment, which I would like you all to read, is the latest judgment. Parth, can you please, this is the reproduction of section 313. And yeah, yes, this is it. What is the importance of section 313? In Reena Hazarika versus State of Assam, the Supreme Court has said that the importance which is attached to section 313 is of a large amplitude, and it has to be taken into consideration by either the appellate court or even the trial court. That is reported in 2019, volume 13, Supreme Court cases, page 289. And the second judgment is Prahalad versus the State of Rajasthan, 2019, 14 SCC, page 438, volume 14, SCC, page 438. Now, this is what the Supreme Court has said, I would just read this one paragraph, which says as this. Kindly pay attention to what the Supreme Court has said. That it is a settled legal position that in a criminal trial, the purpose of examining the accused person under Section 313 CRPC is to meet the requirement of the principles of natural justice, that is audi alteram partem. Now, this is the whole idea. I'm not going to read the whole paragraph which has been reproduced here, that it confers a very valuable right upon an accused to establish his innocence. This is the whole crux of the judgment, and the ratio which has been laid down by the Supreme Court in these two judgments in 2019 is that an accused should not go unheard. Kindly now the next slide, Parth. Whether the defense is acceptable or not, and whether it is compatible or incompatible with the evidence available, is an entirely different matter. If there has been no consideration at all of the defense taken under Section 313 CRPC in the given facts of the case, the conviction may well stand vitiated. This is what the Supreme Court says, that to our mind, a solemn duty is cast on the court in dispensation of justice to adequately consider the defense of the accused taken under Section 313 CRPC and to either accept or reject the same for reasons specified in writing. That is Reena Hazarika versus State of Assam. Yes, Parth. In the judgment that is Prahlad versus State of Rajasthan, the Supreme Court has held this, that no explanation is forthcoming from the statement of the accused under Section 313 CRPC as to when he parted the company of the victim. Also, no explanation is there as to what happened after getting the chocolates for the victim. Thus, now this is important, please pay attention to this. The silence on the part of the accused in such a matter wherein he is expected to come out with an explanation leads to an adverse inference against the accused. So, friends, kindly see the importance that the Supreme Court attaches to the statement under Section 313 before the court. I would request all of you to kindly go through this judgment, these two judgments. Now, the eighth category is, which I have enumerated here, is reading of the judgment and order of conviction and sentence. What do you do whilst reading the judgment and order of conviction? A is finding errors of facts from the findings recorded on facts by the learned judge. Now, how do you find the errors? That those errors can be found by comparing the findings along with the evidence which is there on record. B, finding errors of law. How do you find the errors of law? From the findings recorded on the question of law by the learned judge as compared to the offenses and the provisions of law for which he is likely to be convicted or he has been convicted. 391 is again a very important provision that we all should know, that obviously under the Civil Procedure Code there is no doubt a provision for producing additional evidence at an appellate stage, and akin to that, similar to that, even under the Criminal Procedure Code, the law has given an opportunity to the accused or to any party to produce further evidence at the stage of appeal. That is Section 391, which says that the appellate court may take further. It again starts with the word may take further evidence or direct it to be taken. In dealing with any appeal under this chapter, the appellate court, if it thinks additional evidence to be necessary, shall record its reasons and may either take such evidence itself or direct it to be taken by the magistrate, or when the appellate court is a high court, by a court of sessions or a magistrate. And subsection 2 says that when the additional evidence is taken by the court of sessions or the magistrate, it or he shall certify such evidence to the appellate court, and such court shall thereupon proceed to dispose of the appeal. That is procedure prescribed under subsection 2. Then subsection 3 is the accused or his pleader shall have the right to be present when the additional evidence is taken. That is against procedural and the right given to the pleader or the accused himself. Number subsection 4 is the taking of the evidence under this section shall be subject to the provisions of chapter 23 as if it were an inquiry. there are a few judgments on section 391, which I have enumerated here. One is Rambhau versus State of Maharashtra. That is, please take down 2001, volume 4, Supreme Court cases, page 759. The second judgment is Ashok Shering Bhutia versus State of Sikkim. That is reported in 2011, 4 SCC, page 402. One is, I'm just, it is for a ready reference, where our High Court, Her Ladyship Justice S.G. Gokani ji, had an occasion to deal with a similar issue at the appellate stage itself. That is an order dated the 11th of October 2018, which is passed in Criminal Miscellaneous Application number 2 of 2018, in Criminal Appeal number 1488 of 2016. And the other is 2020, that is State of Gujarat versus Patel Vishnubhai Chaturdas. Yes. Relevant judicial precedents and case laws, I have enumerated here. If you can, Parth, just take it. I would, Parth, since we are running against time and there is paucity of time, can I tell people to take this these judgments on these topics from you?
Jalbhai, can I, subject to what you have to say, one small suggestion?
Yes.
We have another 10, 12 minutes to go.
Oh, okay. Fair.
You can run through the ratios of these judgments.
Yeah.
We will not take queries today. I will request all participants to separately put in a query and we will respond to each one of them thereafter.
Sure, sure. Okay, fine. Then the first topic on which I have given the judgments are motive and intention. Motive assumes greater importance in cases where direct evidence is not available and the prosecution case is based on circumstantial evidence. Therefore, in cases arising out of circumstantial evidence, motive is very important. In cases of direct evidence, obviously, if there is a witness who says that I have seen this person kill this man, then motive doesn't assume that importance, unless you, again, as I said, that you break the evidence of that witness and attack the evidence of that witness, and you are able to attack the evidence, then yes. That is AIR 1994 Supreme Court, page 2585, where it has been held that motive held in the mind of the accused and can seldom be fathomed with any degree of accuracy. That is again 2007, volume 13 SCC, page 90, Ujagar Singh. Number 2, that is conduct of the accused. Again, the conduct of the accused is also very relevant in criminal trial. In order to see the demeanor of the accused, the conduct of the accused, his past antecedents, all these aspects are important in a criminal trial, where AIR 1973 Supreme Court, page 157, where the recorded telephone conversation about the settling of the bribe money was held to be evidence of conduct. Absconding of an accused is a relevant conduct under the Evidence Act. Act of absconding is indicative of the guilt of the accused only to a certain extent, since even innocent persons tend to abscond due to the instinct of self-provocation. That is 1973 Supreme Court. Next, Parth. Yes, the next is test identification parade. What is the relevance and the importance attached to a test identification parade? At which stage it is carried out? That is very important. Kindly take down this judgment. That is State of HP, Himachal Pradesh versus Premchand, reported in 2002, volume 10, SCC, page 518. And another judgment is State of Andhra Pradesh versus V.K. Venkata Reddy, 1976, volume 1, SCC, page 463. Next. Yes, confession. Confession, admission, these are very important issues, which we may, if God willing, we get an opportunity, we'll discuss later on. But on confession, what is the relevancy of a confession, whether it is admissible into evidence or not? This aspect is in detail discussed in Satbir Singh versus State of Punjab, 1977, volume 2 SCC, page 263. The crux, I would just one line state here that the crux of the evidentiary value of confession is that it has to be proved by the prosecution that it was free and voluntary. Next part. Yes, approver is again a very important issue in a criminal trial, and the evidence of an approver is again very important. I'll just give it the relevant provision to you in a minute. An approver is a competent witness against the accused person, but the court, to satisfy its conscience, insists as caution and prudence to seek as a rule corroboration to the evidence of the approver from the independent evidence, ocular or circumstantial, or of general particulars regarding the stories spoken of by the approver of the commission of the crime and the part played by the accused therein. There, find whether it is true and worthy acceptance. The reliability of the evidence of an approver should be considered from the totality of the facts and circumstances. One of the judgments which I find is very relevant here is that is Sevaka Perumal versus State of Tamil Nadu. That is reported in 1991, volume 3, SCC, page 471. Next. Path next. Yeah. Dying declaration. Yes. This is again another very important issue. What is the importance to be attached to a dying declaration? When I say a dying declaration, I mean only one dying declaration, but there have been cases where there are more than one dying declaration, one before the executive magistrate, maybe one before the doctor, maybe one by the police investigating officer who had come there, so on and so forth. But the Supreme Court has said that the evidentiary value, if there are more than one or two dying declarations, the first in point of time should normally be considered, but that is not a thumb rule. That is again not a thumb rule which the Supreme Court has said, but the importance of the dying declaration, the Supreme Court had an opportunity time and again on to lay down the law. That is reported, a very important judgment that is reported in Ashok Lakshman Gaikwad versus the State of Maharashtra, 2006, volume 9, Supreme Court cases, page 587. Another is 1976, part volume 2, Supreme Court Reporter, SCR, page 673. And another important judgment is State of Uttar Pradesh versus Ram Sagar Yadav. That's a very well celebrated judgment. People keep on referring this judgment time and again. AIR 1985 Supreme Court, page 416. And another is AIR 1983 Supreme Court, 164. Yes, Parth, another. Next. Expert's opinion, as I said, what is the value of an expert's opinion? Sir, before I go on to these judgments, I would like to emphasize one thing here, that expert's opinion is very, very important, but an expert's opinion is only and only a corroborative piece of evidence. It cannot be treated as a substantive piece of evidence. The reason is that when an expert opines on a particular subject, take a case, a post-mortem note, or take a handwriting expert, take a ballistic expert, so on and so forth. Any expert, when he gives his evidence is only an opinion, which according to him, on the basis of permutations and combinations, it may happen this, it would have happened this. Therefore, an expert's opinion is only suggestive in nature and not conclusive in nature. Please bear this in mind, that just because the doctor has stated something maybe in the favor of the accused, that by itself may not be a ground for the court to take into consideration and acquit the person, unless and until the evidence of the expert is also corroborated, or the evidence of the expert itself corroborates the say of the other eyewitnesses. the to base a conviction or an acquittal solely on the basis of the evidence of an expert would not be in the interest of justice. One of the judgments, there are judgments which are there. The one judgment is of 2019, volume 8 SCC, page 359. That is Mallikarjun versus State of Karnataka. Next. Yes, this is a very, very important issue, and where I can say the critical aspect can be discussed here, but we are having some paucity of time right now. Therefore, on this issue, I would request that first and foremost, that with respect to admissibility of an electronic record into evidence, the sine qua non is that there has to be a certificate under section 65B of the Evidence Act. Now, who can give that certificate, and what is the relevance of that certificate under 65B, and what is the importance attached to the same, is laid down in two judgments of the Honorable Supreme Court, but diametrically opposite views have been taken by the Supreme Court. Now, since the views have been totally different, and the subsequent judgment does not take into consideration the earlier ratio laid down by the Supreme Court, the matter has been referred to the larger bench, and the judgments are these two judgments, that is Anwar PV versus PK Bashir. Please note this, 2014 10 SCC, volume 10 SCC, page 473. And a contrary view is taken by the Supreme Court in Shafi Muhammad versus State of Himachal Pradesh, reported in 2018, volume 2, Supreme Court cases, page 801. Absolutely opposite, a contrary view has been taken to what has been taken, what view has been taken in PV, Anwar PV, wherein the Supreme Court had observed that a party who is not in possession of the device from which the electronic document is produced cannot be required to produce the certificate under section 65B, subsection 4 of the Evidence Act. Now, in view of the two aforesaid contrary views, the issue as to whether the requirement of a certificate under section 65B, subsection 4 of the Evidence Act is mandatory or not for the production of electronic evidence is referred to a larger bench, and the same is pending decision. And therefore, these two judgments would assume a lot of importance, but I would request you to read both the judgments, and also read, if you go on the Supreme Court website, you will get the referring judgment also, referring order. I would not say the judgment, which is also there. Yes, if you want to take down the referring order, I have it with me. 2019 SCC online, Supreme Court, page 1553. Another aspect is evidence of hostile witness. Yeah, I mean, this issue has now been settled by the Supreme Court time and again. On a number of occasions, the Supreme Court has said that what part of the hostile witness's evidence can be admissible and what not. You can go through the same in Shyamal Ghosh versus State of West Bengal. That is AIR 2012 Supreme Court, page 3539. Parth? The importance of the evidence of the investigating officer. Many a times it so happens that the punch witnesses, prosecution witnesses, some of them turn hostile. And therefore the panchnamas, which are also one of the important pieces of evidence in a criminal trial, the prosecution was not in a position to prove the panchnamas. Therefore, the Supreme Court laid down this principle that maybe the panchas have turned hostile, but nevertheless, the investigating officer's evidence is very important. And if it is proved in the evidence of the investigating officer that such and such panchnama was carried out, then the evidence of the investigating officer can be taken into consideration for proving the panchnamas. some judgment, two judgments, two or three judgments. One is Ramesh Bhai Mohan Bhai Kohli versus State of Gujarat, reported in 2011, volume 11, Supreme Court cases 111. And one is, again, I have already given you this judgment, that is Malika Arjun and others versus State of Karnataka, reported in 2019, volume 8 SCC, page 359. Yes, Parth? Evidence of child witness, yes. The Supreme Court has time and again said that the evidence of the child witness is, has to be taken into consideration with a lot of care and caution. And that is governed under the provisions of section 118 of the Evidence Act. So whilst dealing with an appeal, obviously, if you come across the evidence of a child witness, which the trial court has allowed or not allowed, whichever way, but you will be governed by the provisions of 118 of the Evidence Act. And which one of the judgments which you may take down is, that is 2008, volume 2, Supreme, page 592. That is the judgment which you can take down. Well, on circumstantial evidence, again, there are a number of judgments. I don't need to even give you these citations. Though, if you can take down in this small time of about 30 seconds that you have, please jot it down. Otherwise, you can get the copy of the PPT from Parth. Parth, another. Then it's hearsay evidence. What is the evidentiary value of hearsay witness? Again, this you can get it from Parth on the PPT.
We'll circulate the PPT to.
Yeah, because I've been seeing number of questions which have been put by the panelists here.
Yes.
That will I get the copy of the PPT?
Yes, we'll be circulating the recording as well as the PPT.
Okay. Can you put the volume on for the participants?
Jalbhai, participants' volumes we won't be able to unmute because we have a huge number of people who are listening to us.
Right.
So, otherwise,
we may take one or two if sir permit.
I don't mind, but sir, then I don't want to do any injustice to the other panelists who are there.
So therefore, Jalbhai, what we can do is we've exhausted the entire time schedule. We've had a fantastic hearing. In fact, I didn't want to curtail you because we were really enjoying in terms of the flow that was happening. Yeah, so what I have suggested to all the participants is that I have circulated my email ID to everybody. All the queries can be put to us on the email ID. I will forward it to you and then we'll respond to each one of them. I will ensure that all of those are responded to.
I promise every panelist here that whichever the queries are there, we will try to satisfy all the queries and we will reply to all of them.
Yes.
I'm sorry if I've taken a lot of time. Thank you so much, Parth. And thank you, Dhruven Bhai, Vishwesh Bhai and Parth. Thank you very much for these efforts of yours and bringing all together over here. It was a nice experience.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jalbhai. We had a fantastic session today. Okay. Large number of participants also. Yes. Criminal law certainly is a completely new field for, at least for me. Thoroughly enjoyed the session. Sincerely apologize to the participants because we could not take queries. But we'll try and cover that up by responding to each one of you to the queries through email. Okay. Thank you, Dhruven Bhai, and thank you, Vishwesh Bhai, for putting all of this through for all of us. We'll see all of you tomorrow at 4 p.m. We have a session on arbitration by Senior Advocate Mr. Devang Nanavati. So see you all tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you, Jalbhai. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good Sunday.
Yep.